Okay. Hello. Hi. Hi, my name is Julia Galloway, and I am on the board of NCECA, and I'm so happy to be here to introduce your next panel. Today, this co-lecture panel is going to be on materials in action, the collective matters. And we have Eva Mastrand, Katie Sprague, and Mary O'Malley. Yes? Mary O'Malley? Great. Did I say that wrong, Masterman? Masterman. Ooh, that sounds so good. Let me do that again. Eva Masterman. Is that better? Yeah, great. Okay, I apologize. Thank you, Eva, for your patience. Today, this is a UK arts group based on the collective matter, and you are going to present your most recent social outreach program. And I will now no longer waste your time and welcome our presenters, please. Thank you so much.
So we all decided we were way too fidgety to sit at that table the whole time, so we're going to move around on the stage. So we are Collective Matter. We are an arts-based education collective out of London. And as Julia said, we're going to be presenting our social engagement project, Material Action, which we did at the Tate Modern exactly a year ago, which is kind of crazy. So we'll begin by introducing ourselves, which will help explain why I have an American accent, even though we're from London. And we're going to also discuss the educational landscapes in the UK to kind of like see the differences and similarities to here and there. And then at the end, we're going to leave a little bit of time, hopefully, for a Q&A. So I'll pass on to Katie to begin.
So we are Collective Matter, which is a collaboration between three artists, Eva Masterman, Mary O'Malley, and me, Katie Sprague. And we met at grad school on the Ceramics and Glass Master's Programme at the Royal College of Art in London in 2014. And there we began discussing our differing background approaches to clay making, so whether that be fine art, traditional craft, or design. And we found that we were all interested in the state of arts education and where this left skills-based learning. So through these discussions, we decided to form a collective to be able to continue that discussion in the wider world and to start to consider some solutions to the problems that we were talking about. Through our activities as a collective, we explore how clay can be used to engage critical discussion, bring about cross-disciplinary practice, and promote experimentation. Our ambition is to promote the value of creative thinking and making across and beyond the visual arts. So we're going to begin with a little introduction to our individual making practices and our teaching practices, starting with Eva.
So, hello, I'm Eva, obviously. I originally studied fine art, and my practice looks at languages of the studio and how to use that to explore personal histories. But it's been heavily influenced by this influx of naive making that we've been having in the UK over the last sort of 10 years to do with clay and fine art. And that sort of relationship. And through that, I've managed to get a lectureship at the University of Westminster, where I teach cross-disciplinary ceramics at the Ceramic Research Centre with Claire Twomey. We have a little plug for the university, because they paid for me to get here. We've got a really great PhD programme, and I've got some extra information about the programme and what we've been doing as a research centre, if anyone's interested in coming and talking to me about that later. And I also work at another university called City and Guilds of London Arts School, which is a BA and MA programme. And their sort of ethos is to juxtapose contemporary art with specialist skills.
So, hello, I'm Mary O'Malley. I'm originally from Long Island, and I did my undergraduate at UArts in Philly. Go Birds. And I then, when I was there, I taught the University City Arts League. I also did some teaching at the Long Island Art League and was a visiting artist at high schools on Long Island. After Philly, I did move back to Long Island and built this body of work, which I exhibited with at ACC shows and the PMA craft show, the Clay Studio, and some other galleries. I then moved to London to do my MA at the RCA, which is where I met these two and brought them back. There I also taught at the Camden Art Center, which Katie's going to tell you a little bit more about. And I did a visiting lectureship at the University of Brighton in their undergraduate design craft course. And then, so I've now just recently moved back to Long Island to my studio to continue my practice. And I'll be teaching some workshops at the Parish Museum in Bridgehampton starting this June. And I'm also pursuing a university position here. So, Katie?
I originally studied at Brighton University on the south coast in the UK, where I did a course that at the time was called Wood, Metals, Ceramics and Plastics. So I've got a background in making across those materials. I have a long-term teaching role at Camden Arts Centre, where both Eva and Mary have also taught, which is a gallery with a ceramic space, which is quite a good situation. I've taught at Brighton University at a pottery, as well as running workshops at schools and museums. And at the moment, I've been doing some visitor lecturing at the Royal College of Art on their ceramics and glass programme, where we all studied. So if anyone has any questions about that programme, feel free to ask me at the end.
Right, so that was a bit about our background as artists, but to kind of bring it back into this conversation that we've been having about the broader contemporary landscape that we're working in within the UK, there's been a widespread closure of ceramic undergraduate and graduate courses over the past decade, but that's been ironically countered by an increased interest in the material throughout other fields, so most noticeably fine arts. And there's also been this general popularization of clay and craft processes within the general public. So that's manifested itself in lots of different ways, from bank adverts to this particularly successful TV programme, which was done by the same makers as the Great British Bake Off. I don't know if that came over this far, but so that this particular one, the Great Pottery Throwdown, had over 2 million viewers, and I think it's had at least 2 seasons so far. So all of that kind of general energy around clay has resulted in a massive upswing in adult education and evening classes. But in relation to universities and formal education, what's been happening is that as ceramic courses have shut down, their workshops have been amalgamated as a general resource, and courses such as fine art or product design, who perhaps wouldn't have had access to those facilities, have been given access to these processes and equipment. And there's resulted in a subsequent rise of these like non-specialist clay makers. And as I said, this can kind of be seen keenly through a few key examples of these younger artists that are typical of the kind of UK naive making that seems to have is becoming very popular in fine art practice. And in response to all of that, or this movement of artists and makers approaching clay outside of a traditional or kind of more formal education, what we've seen is this encouraging amount of alternative peer and artist-led initiatives which have risen up to fill the gap that perhaps more formal education has left. So Turning Earth particularly opened in 2013, and that was based on a US model of these community potteries, which didn't really exist in the UK before. And that's been incredibly successful and has resulted in various other places opening up which have followed the same kind of format. And whilst that remains probably the most popular format for these workshops, that kind of open access model, the interest in clay as a fine art medium has also encouraged initiatives such as Modern Clay, which you can see up there, which is up in Birmingham. And that's artist run, but offers opportunities for community making and more outreach projects. And as well, there's been more exclusive spaces opening up, such as Troy Town, which is the top right, which is for purely non-specialist fine artists to experiment with clay as a sculptural medium. So, as well as that peer and artist-led learning, there's also been a big upswing in the commitment of institutions such as museums and galleries to expand and promote education. And there's been a real reshuffle of the language that's used within these arenas. So it's been a move away from this word education and more into the sort of the realm of learning, which is education would be the formal training that one would get at a university or a school. And then learning is more of the type of hands-on transient experiences and opportunities that can be facilitated in spaces without that formal construct of marking. And one of the biggest examples of that commitment to alternative learning programs has been spearheaded by the Tate Modern.
So in 2016, the Tate Exchange launched as a new initiative at the Tate Modern, and they've dedicated an entire floor of their new building to this programme, where they invite individuals and institutions from art schools to independent radio stations to come in, take over that space and deliver a public programme. The Tate describes the Tate Exchange as a space for everyone to collaborate, test ideas and discover new perspectives on life through art. Tate Exchange offers free artist-run workshops and events, which gives the public a direct link to artists and opportunities to explore their own creativity. It runs on a yearly themed programme of events where a lead artist sets the theme and then associates come in to fill the programme. So interestingly, this year's lead artist is Claire Toomey, who's a UK-based clay artist. And there was already a strong clay presence in the programme the previous year, which is the year that we took part with our project, and also others such as the People's Bureau that you can see a few images of here. But putting Claire as the head artist firmly plants clay as a key material in conversations around wider creativity and learning.
So shortly after graduating from the Royal College of Art in 2016, where we unofficially started Art Collective mostly based on arguments we had about the right way of doing things, we were selected from hundreds of applicants to participate in the new Tate Exchange residency. So we were commissioned to facilitate a 6-month-long social engagement project, which took place over 4 gallery sites in South London, and was funded by the 9 Elms Vauxhall Partnership, which is made up of local government representatives and the major urban developer in the area. So we worked with Gasworks, Beaconsfield Gallery Vauxhall, and Pump House Gallery to run a program of clay-based workshops and seminars that explored the major changes occurring in the local area, which was being instigated by major urban development, something that is common in a lot of cities. So this area also happens to be where the American Embassy is, which has an actual moat, just so you know. So with a focus on 14 to 25-year-olds living or studying in South London, we worked with over 150 participants across 2 London boroughs, including numerous community groups, schools, and colleges. And the project ended with a 1-day closing event at the Tate Modern in March of 2017. So throughout the workshops, we aimed to explore clay as a material, which engaged in interaction and confidence amongst the participants. And we did this through large-scale collaborative installations to one-on-one teaching. And the whole project was pretty massive undertaking for 3 people. So we ended up dividing it into 3 chapters, with each of us taking on one of the 3 galleries and its connected workshops and community groups. So in doing this, we were able to draw on each partner gallery's particular strengths and facilities in developing a bespoke program that we created for each of them.
So the initial chapter of Material Action I led, and it began at Beaconsfield Gallery Vauxhall, which you can see up here, and we had access to their very large railway arch space, which was in the sort of back end of it, for 2 whole weeks. And so what we did with that was really utilize that space and led an experimental project with a focus on self-learning, clay, and collaboration. So essentially what we did was dump 3 tons of clay, which is a lot of clay, donated by a nearby brick factory, Ibstock Brick, into the middle of the space, and then with just a few guidances and a few prompts relating to the project's overarching theme of urban development and change, essentially just said, go for it, to anyone who turned up into the space. And the result was this large-scale, unfired clay urban landscape, which was populated with everything from models of the iconic Shard building to parks with giant flowers and Godzilla-scale Pokemon characters. Is that going to play? Yes. The recruitment of participants was a large part of our responsibility for this project, and we began with lists of local community groups which the galleries had already built up, and contacting them directly and working out how their established groups could become involved in the workshops. But as well as that, we literally just hit the pavement and spent an awful lot of time just walking around the local neighbourhoods, getting to know the local people and talking to any community organisations that we stumbled across. And we found mentioning the word clay and free when describing the workshops evoked an instant interest in the people that we spoke to. The project at Beaconsfield attracted a really diverse range of participants. So we had a group of inter-school refugee girls and also pretty much everyone in between, right up to a community adventure playground, which was run by youth workers that brought groups of children continually over the 2 weeks to come and build with clay in the space. And that was a really lovely connection to make, actually, because they were so inspired by the project that when it ended, or when that particular section of the project ended, we delivered a load of this used clay to them, and they've been in the process of, I think over the last year, because it was quite a lot, been recycling it and turning it into their very own clay pit. So as well as the clay making, it was important for us to use the material as a way of mapping stories in the area, sort of linking it back to that idea of urban change. And with the Beaconsfield, it saw the beginning of the Exchange, which was a storytelling booth that encouraged participants to talk about what they'd made and how it related to their experiences of the local area. And we wanted to, and did, continue to collect and add to this archive as we moved between the different sites.
What we found interesting during this project was that 2 out of the 3 galleries we worked with had either lost or downsized their participation department. And Gasworks had even replaced their communities and participation officer with a participation artist residency, which we felt really showed this increasing responsibility on artists in this area. Pump House, however, do still have a participation department, and it was this that we tapped into for this part of the project. We found that the project as an overall thing was really valuable for the 3 galleries because it allowed them to reinstate this participation part of their offer and to also build their database of local people through the people we work with. I worked with Pump House to create a project where we went out into the community instead of basing the workshops in the gallery to deliver tailored workshops to a secondary school, a youth group and a community centre. For this part of the project, every participant we worked with made a clay brick, and this was decorated to express their feelings about the changing neighbourhood and the natural world of their locality. Many of the buildings in London are made of brick, but they're not designed by the young people who live in them or work in them or go to school in them. They're designed instead by architects or building developers who were removed from the people there. So what we wanted to do with this part of the project was to give the participants a metaphorical building block to take creative control over and ownership of their own individual territory. This part of the project revealed the challenge in engaging groups of young people dubbed hard to reach, but we found it was the most rewarding when this engagement was achieved. Working with a youth centre in the midst of a council estate, which is a social housing area in the UK, our first challenge was to gain the trust of the key youth worker, to prove that our project had some value for the young people. We also had our own anxiety going into this project that we're artists coming in from very different backgrounds to these young people. Once we were running the workshops and we had the group of young people there, we found that the challenge was then to keep a group of very boisterous, energetic 13-year-old boys to focus for at least 10 seconds. So we had to bring them away from these exciting, important activities of insulting each other, insulting each other's mums, going outside the youth group to argue with the older children, and stabbing the clay with all the clay tools that we'd brought in. But once this was achieved, it was really exciting to see just how skilled they were and how careful they were with the creation of their bricks, how important attention to detail was for them, and how the practical sides of creating something structural appealed to them. So when we realised that they had this real interest in the practical skills and the process, we went on a YouTube journey with them, looking at videos of brick factories, so trying to cement these ideas of making in a practical application. We had similar experiences working with 14-year-old students at Battersea Academy Secondary School, where we saw a noticeable pride in creating something physical and it working, and the frustration when it didn't. We brought them out of the classroom to see their finished pieces on display at the Pump House Gallery before being taken onto the Tate Modern. With each of these groups, we found that providing a challenging activity and allowing them to gain ownership were key elements in engaging them, and that Clay's dynamic ability as a tool for education was key in achieving this.
So I ran the workshops held at Gasworks, which is a gallery and an international residency program with a well-established public outreach program. So unlike Beaconsfield and Pump House, Gasworks had an admin team in place and the resources, which made recruitment a lot easier. But the challenge that presented itself here was the fact that I had to create clay-based workshops in an activity room without the necessary facilities generally associated with ceramics, such as sinks with traps, kilns, mops, and this is actually a common challenge in museums and gallery education spaces here as well, I think. So I took advantage of this by exploring a concept embedded in our ethos, which is providing material-based learning with a structure that allows for non-traditional outcomes. So therefore, the 2 workshops I created for Gasworks had this in mind. So the first workshop was based on the idea of kintsugi, which I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with. It's a Japanese technique in which gold and lacquer are used to repair broken pottery. And the ideas behind this technique paralleled our project's material action with its elements of change, evolution, and new beginnings. So this topic had recently trended on social media at the time, which also really helped recruitment. So for the kintsugi workshop, we collected broken and discarded ceramics from the shores of the Thames, which was right nearby the gallery. And it also happened to be where the original Royal Dalton factory existed. And that process of collecting, there's so much clay along the Thames riverbank that it's an activity called mudlarking, and people do it quite often. And so we collected all those broken ceramics and also broken ceramics from local thrift stores in the area. And then participants were also asked to bring in their own items to be added to the pile of bric-a-brac, as well as a ceramic object that had meaning to them, which didn't get smashed and they got to take home. During the workshop, I led discussions relating to how individuals relate to objects, why the object they brought with them had meaning, and why artists work with objects to communicate ideas. So this discussion also directly related to the Tate Modern exhibition occurring at the time titled Materials and Objects, which was something our original project brief asked us to do. So throughout the workshops, participants worked in groups, smashing the collected discarded pottery and using inspiration from the stories of the precious objects they brought in, thus creating new heirlooms, which was the title of the workshop. In creating their new heirlooms, a particular group noticed the different countries represented on the bottoms of the bric-a-brac and created a sculpture assembled with this aspect of the objects revealed, creating a sort of ceramic quilted map. The fact that these items originally came from the surrounding area paralleled discussions relating to Brexit and immigration and instigated a really thoughtful conversation amongst the participants. So then the second workshop that we held at Gasworks was actually inspired by the research behind the Kintsugi project. So when I contacted Royal Dalton to see if they would be able to donate seconds to our workshop, I learned that their production was now occurring in China and Indonesia, which is actually quite a common thing for those potteries. I found the idea of an object being designed by one person and produced by another so far away interesting. So I therefore developed a one-day drop-in workshop where participants designed pots on iPads using a pottery throwing app called Let's Create, I think. And they were then prompted to create the same object in real life using traditional techniques such as throwing and coil building. They were also given the option to pass off their designs to makers with and without technical skill. So participants experienced the frustrations and excitement in commuting creative ideas and explored the differences in digital and physical creativity. And one participant remarked that they were intimidated by the pottery wheel at first, but found engaging with the app initially gave them the confidence and interest to attempt the real thing.
So the final iteration of the project was this one-day showcase of live events and exhibition that we held at the actual Tate Modern on the Tate Exchange floor itself. And while we had about 150 people involved in the workshops over a period of about 3 months, the actual one-day event, we had about over 500 people coming. And we reinstated a scaled-down version of the collaborative installation that we had at Beaconsfield Gallery, along with the time-lapse video that you saw. We had images and an exhibit of the bricks from the pump house section, and we recreated the full kintsugi and digital workshops from Gasworks. So by doing all of that, we led visitors through a physical timeline of the project, setting up these stations which represented each individual workshop, and giving the general public an opportunity to try these processes for themselves, as well as seeing the outcomes that had been created through our established participants. So as well as the practical opportunities, we also set up our exchange booth, which we'd initiated at Beaconsfield, and we'd been collecting images and stories, both written and audio, right the way through the project. And that gave people, or our visitors, a chance to hear other people's stories, as well as adding that to the conversation. And that all got added to a digital archive that we'd been putting together as well. And part of although it was an important opportunity for our participants to have their work showcased at a professional level, and those that came back, particularly the students from Battersea Academy, found it an incredibly rewarding and unique experience. And along that theme of professional development, a really gratifying and quite unexpected outcome was a group of brilliant volunteers of mostly London-based art school students that we'd collected throughout the project. And we put a big call out, and then loads of people came back and started helping us, and they just kept on coming back. And it was amazing to have their support, because we wouldn't have been able to have done it on this scale without them. And it was really amazing to be able to give these students this valuable professional experience of workshopping and using their skills in that way.
As well as the experience of all the practical logistics involved in creating a project of this size and scope, and we're now all professional, large-scale lorry drivers through narrow London streets. Sorry, a lorry is a van. Material action really proved to us the importance of giving people the opportunity to work with their hands, and of clay's ability to inspire, break down inhibition, and facilitate conversations. The workshops we ran brought very different people together, and it was interesting to think in what other contexts were they likely to have met. It also provided us with our first opportunity to put into practice the various teaching approaches that we as individuals were interested in, be that less guided experimentation or skill-based instruction. Material action has begun for us an ongoing exploration of how alternative learning methods can progress the ceramic field, and how clay may be used as a vehicle for creative development and cross-disciplinary practice.
So as a collective, we believe that access to materials and skills are a key element of creative production and education. And providing opportunities for artists and the public to encounter these is at the heart of our future plans. We have various projects coming up in London, including a residency program on our new studios, which we just built over the past year with Turner Prize-winning group. They're an arts architecture group called Assemble. And we also have some public workshops planned as well. So if you're interested in keeping in touch, please follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Those are our handles and all of our information. Take a picture if you like. Visit our website. And one of the main reasons we were excited about showing this project here at NCECA was to hear your thoughts and to bring this to kind of an international conversation. So I think we have a few minutes left to open it up to you guys to ask us questions, or if you have any comments, there's a microphone in the center aisle there. You kind of have to travel to it, talk into it, and then we'll answer. If we run out of time, we're gonna be hovering outside the room, and you're welcome to approach us as well. We have 5 minutes. No. So for this project, it came from this kind of conglomerate that was a partnership between the councils that all of this urban development was going on, and the developer that was doing the developing. And it's like a 30-year development project. So I think it's something that happens here as well when you break new ground or develop, the developers or the government often has to put money back into the community. So I think this was that, I forget what it's called, but that was, this chunk of money was used to kind of engage the local community. Because in particular, this development was happening, it wasn't gentrifying because the area where it was being built was mostly industrial, but it was completely blocking access for these communities behind it to the Thames riverfront. Yeah.
Recorded. Amazing project. I'm wondering how much direction for conversation you gave to the participants when you were saying that they would do the projects and sort of conversation happened. Were you giving them prompts, or were people just kind of having their own thing? And did you think about this beforehand? Were you trying to decide how to handle that? Because we're wondering that ourselves.
So we sort of approached each section of the project differently. One example where we gave quite a sort of strong prompt was when we worked with the secondary school, where we set them some homework that I think a few of the girls were like, we just got detention. Didn't do it. But we wanted them to think about something in their neighbourhood that they liked, something that they disliked, and something that they hoped would change. So we were giving them sort of quite direct prompts and asking them to take pictures and tag it on Instagram, to sort of build up this archive of images that way. At the project that Eva ran at Beaconsfield, again, we had prompts where we were asking them different questions about how they felt about where they lived, or if they had any stories to share, and that was recorded both through the exchange and through writing on these little post-its and adding them to our map.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything else we did?
Yeah, it was just to say that what ended up happening was that there was a lot of, we kind of started off with very simple questions. It was like, what's on the corner of your street, or like in the Beaconsfield one, we had things like build a fire station or something like that. And then from that, because a lot of them were, in fact, all of them, the smallest group that we had was about 10, 15 people per group. So because they were such big groups, you ended up having this really interesting conversation that was just happening. And whilst they were making, they were kind of given this thing to make or an instruction to make. But whilst they were doing this with their hands, they'd be sitting there and having a conversation next to people. And the intergenerational exchange as well for some of the ones, especially at Mary's space and in the Beaconsfield space as well, where you had very young people with their like parents and things like that. There was a lot of really interesting conversations that happened, which was, I think, especially completely unplanned. And because the Beaconsfield one especially was so free, it meant that all we had to do was kind of stand around and be like, oh, that's interesting, what's that? So you could really get into the conversation through the activity of making.
Yeah, I would say that we had, if we did any sort of like prompts like that, it was just to initiate engagement and get people comfortable, because sometimes they would just walk in and be like, and be like, yes, do this thing, and then they would sit down, and then it kind of organically just turned into its own thing, which was kind of part of the excitement. And we didn't really kind of corral it back to what our agenda was. We kind of just let it grow in each space. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So I live in England, and I've worked in regeneration projects. So I was curious to know, beyond the project, beyond that clump of money that you had to do the initial workshops, was there any sustainable outcome in those communities?
So that was something that we were really keen to promote when we had the evaluation for the project, because we didn't want the funders to just have given us this money and then leave the people we did it behind.
It was something that they were really keen as well.
Yeah. But we were very keen to push that. And we have maintained a relationship with a lot of the community leaders who we worked with through that project. Can you think of?
But I think that there was a network created amongst the galleries that didn't exist beforehand, and so that kind of communication, that partnership, has initiated a legacy, and so they're working with the community groups. I know FAST, like the Pump House, the relationships we made with FAST and on the council estates, which are kind of a hard place to get into, they're continuing to do projects with them as well.
Yeah, that was somewhere that they'd been hoping to work with, I think, over a few years, and so now that sort of initial relationship's been established.
Thank you for coming.